Well, welcome everyone to our handicap hole allocation presentation. It's Kelly Miller here, your club captain. I wanted to, I guess before we get started, I just wanted to thank Emerson and his team for all the work that they've done in gathering and analyzing all the hole-by-hole scores for this analysis. Their analysis was reviewed with the golf committee, the men's committee. The presentation was reviewed with the board as well. And based on their feedback, we're going to do today's session. Emerson and his team prepared the presentation to explain the changes. This was provided with the email of my first Captain's Corner, and Emerson will go through it today. There's also going to be an opportunity to ask questions about the changes. I wanted to thank Jeff Jewell for setting up this online session for us and for arranging the recording of it. We are recording the session, so if you know of anyone who missed this session and would like to learn more about the handicap hole allocation, it will be available, and we'll send a communication with a link once the session is available. So I'm going to turn the presentation over to Emerson now.
Thanks, Kelly, and thanks, Jeff, for all your efforts, and welcome everyone to the session. So I thought maybe we'll start with our first slide, and what is handicap hole allocation? So the allocation of handicap holes is basically to equalize the abilities of players at different handicap levels, especially in our net competitions. The handicap hole allocation represents the ordering of our most likely hole that a bogey player, given the parameters below there, players with a handicap greater than 10 that would require a stroke to have a hole with a scratch player, or someone with a less than 10 handicap for men. Bogey player for ladies is someone with a handicap greater than 18 and less than 19. You'll note there that the allocation is not based on the degree of difficulty in making par on a hole. It is based on the differential between the average score of a bogey player versus a scratch player. When we look at the next slide here, you'll see the differentials for each of the holes. I must make mention too that this data was collected over a 2-year period, so our 2016-2017 golf season. The events that were utilized were all our club championship events, so events in which we ensured the rules of golf were being followed. The golf ball was being holed out in each event, and there was no equitable stroke control utilized with these scores. So I think the slide is self-explanatory there, where we can see the average score for the bogey player on each of the front 9 holes, the average score of our scratch player for each of the front 9 scores, and then the differential. Likewise, you can see on the back 9 the same information. We look at our next slide here, we can see the data for our ladies' differentials. What are some of the best practices for allocating our handicap holes? So we did refer to Golf Canada's recommendation in their handicap manual. You could see there that we needed to avoid allocating the number 1 and number 2 stroke hole to the first 2 holes or the end of each 9. And the reason for that is you want to have that bogey player have the ability to use those strokes before the end of the match. In the event of a sudden death playoff, you also want to avoid having those number 1 and number 2 stroke holes on the first 2 holes of the front 9. When we assign the odd number stroke holes, we assign those to the back 9, because after analyzing all of the data, we noticed that the back 9 actually played more difficult for both the bogey player and the scratch player, averaging far more over par than the front 9. Our handicap hole allocation should be reviewed every 7 to 10 years, so this being my 10th season here at Brampton, we had not analyzed this data over that time period. They also suggest that if your golf course has undergone a major redesign, or if you've had an influx of over 100 new members over a course of some time, that you want to analyze this data. Brampton's history, I guess I covered off a little bit of that as far as the lack of review that we've had. Scoring data again was 2016-2017 tournament scores. You'll see that we had 483 scores for men and 469 scores for our ladies. The scoring data indicates that the stroke holes were in need of reallocation. So some of the high impact holes here, we could see, as I mentioned, our back nine played more difficult than the front nine. Thus, the odd number holes were assigned to the back nine, even numbers on the front nine. And you can see those averages over par, front nine versus back nine for both men and women. The next slide showcases the difference in the big movers there. We can see the old stroke hole in the second column and our new stroke hole in the third column. So the big movers on our men's side, we could see number 4 and number 14. So number 4 moved from the 3rd ranked hole to the 12th ranked. And part of the rationale, if we think back to, how these holes are allocated, they're the lower the number, the higher the differential between that scratch player and bogey player. And then the lower the differential, obviously the higher the handicap rated hole. So we think about number 4. 4 is a difficult hole, regardless of your ability. So it's less likely that a bogey player would need that stroke to have the hole versus the scratch player. The 14th hole moved from our 10th ranked hole to the 1st ranked hole based on a relatively high differential of 0.54. Now, it wasn't the highest differential on the back nine, but we had to take into consideration the recommendations from Golf Canada, where we do not want to have those low numbered stroke holes falling at the end of a 9 or at the beginning of a 9. Other holes, given the purpose, important to have them available to a player, as I mentioned, before the last few holes of a round. A little example here of our McDonald match play, which is a season-long competition. We could see if player A had a handicap of 12 and player B had a handicap of 22, there would be a difference of 10 strokes. And we could see where those holes would have fallen last year and where they're fallen this year. So if we think back to maybe our own games, we may be able to rationalize a little bit more with those strokes, realizing that the 4th hole, 16th hole, are probably more difficult holes, but they're also more difficult for the scratch and the bogey, and maybe could take advantage of having that stroke on number 1, 12, or 17, where that differential would be a little greater. When we look at our ladies' stroke holes there, again, we can see the old stroke hole in the first column and the new stroke hole in the third column. Big movers for our ladies. Again, holes number 4. I think we can all agree that the 4th hole is a difficult hole and less likely that a player would need a stroke. And number 15, moving from our 14th ranked hole to the 1st ranked stroke hole. Some of the other things that the Golf Canada manual does suggest is distance. So the length of a hole can dictate its ability to rank higher for the bogey player, as well as any hazards that are in the front of the green. So when we look at 14 for the men, 15 for the ladies, those bunkers in front of the green can pose a bit of an issue for those higher handicap holes. If we look at our ladies Duggan match play, we can see they're similar to the men's McDonald. So if there was a stroke differential there of 8, so the holes that are now included would be 1, 6, and 15, and then removed would be 4, 8, and 10. So that would conclude the formal presentation of the information that was presented. If there's any questions that our audience have, I'd be happy to answer those at this time. Hello. Hello.
Hello.
Hello.
Kent Armstrong here. I guess just a quick comment first. I find it really interesting, and I'm surprised that there wasn't more participants in this, because I think it's a very good opportunity to be able to present changes at the course. But my first comment, the next comment is I found it very interesting. And probably I didn't quite understand when you think of a scratch golfer, you think of somebody that has a 0 handicap or a low handicap. So I found that confusing, comparing that to a bogey player, which would be a greater than 10 to 18 or whatever. So, but I think throughout the presentation and looking at what a bogey and a scratch golfer was, it kind of clarified things. Because you're always thinking of the scratch player being like 0. So if I'm a 12, then I get 12 shots on in a tournament play or a club event. So I think it's been cleared up. But if Emerson, if you'd like to make any comments on that, that would be great.
Yeah, Kent, you and I had a discussion prior to the start of the presentation, and I actually didn't look at it in the regard that you had posed, but you're correct there. And I think the example that you had used, if you were a 10 or a 12 handicap and I was a 4 handicap, then I would play off of 0, so being the scratch player or the lower handicap of our match. So thus you would receive the difference in that handicap range. So even though I'm a 4 handicap, I would still be playing as the scratch player. So scratch player, yes, is a less than 11 handicap, but also the lower of the 2 players in the match. So I do appreciate, Kent, you bringing that to the presentation.
Thanks for the clarification. And I guess the other question or comment that I have is, I think that I wouldn't be surprised that if you talk to a lot of the members or people that whether they do play in official sanctioned club tournaments or not, I was surprised to find out that a handicap system does not determine the most difficult, or if the hole is the most difficult. I find that it's based on comparisons to scratch golfers or not scratch golfers, but always looking at a scorecard from a visiting or going to another course, you see the fact that you always think that that's a number 1 handicap hole, has to be the most difficult hole, or it's number 18 handicap hole, it's the most it's the easiest hole. So I think that this is a great clarification for that, and it's very interesting. And I think that once people understand that, they'll understand what how the system works a little bit better. But that's the way I always looked at it, and I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of the members think the same way.
Yeah, thanks, Kent, for that comment. And there are two ways that you can allocate the holes. One in which you just strictly take all the scores from the players in the events, and you strictly base those allocations by the hole that plays the most under par. The second option is the option that the golf committee chose to take, which was that differential, which when we do think about it, it makes a little bit more sense when we do have the number of matches that take place either in the club events or just in your Saturday or Sunday morning golf games amongst your golf group. You want to make sure that you're getting your strokes on the holes that you need them. There's no sense in having one on 16 if the odds are that your opponent's going to make 4 as easily as you're going to make 4. You want that help on the hole that you're going to need it. Hopefully that helps explain the rationale.
Makes a lot more sense to me anyway, just the clarification and having the presentation works.
Well, it was an idea of our golf committee, and I'm really glad that we were able to share this with the membership, and the fact that it's going to be online and people will be able to refer to it. Hopefully, answers any questions that those that weren't able to attend can get from the info.
Okay. So I don't think there's any more questions, Emerson.
No, I haven't received any emails or. Jeff, was there any way for anybody to type a question in that I may have missed, or?
Yeah, I'm just checking the window here. We just have Colin just thanks very much and appreciates the fact that he now has a better understanding of how the decisions were made.
Okay, great.
All right. Well, I think that will wrap up the presentation, and hopefully the information is very helpful to anyone else who listens to it. And thanks to those that participated.
Thanks, Kelly. Thanks, Jeff, and thanks everybody for tuning in.